All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started just to be cognizant of time. So welcome to our PDF accessibility and manual remediation in Adobe Acrobat session today. My name is Phil Deaton, and I'm an Assistant Director and Deputy ADA Coordinator in the Disability Equity Office, which is a part of the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX Office. And we are here today to talk with you about PDF accessibility. I'm joined also by Jessica McQuaig, who is a Senior Digital Accessibility Specialist in the Disability Equity Office, and Naira Tumanyan, who is a Program Manager for Faculty Development and Global Engagement in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. So if we want to go ahead and advance to the next slide, I'll give a couple of tips about how to interact with us today. So folks are welcome to use the question and answer feature to submit questions that come up as you're engaging with the webinar today. We do have some accessibility features available for you today. We have American Sign Language interpreters and you can access the American Sign Language interpreters by using the interpretation feature in Zoom and selecting American Sign Language. We also do have live captioning today, provided by a CART transcriptionist, and that can be turned on by selecting Show Captions. And we're very thankful to our accessibility groups in the American Sign Language interpreters and our CART partners today for providing service. Thank you. So really quickly, we want to go over the agenda for today. Before we do that, we just wanted to mention that the University of Michigan is committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and the needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our diverse community. As we're diving into the workshop today, we did want to mention that this is an intermediate workshop, and it is also part one in a two-part series on PDF accessibility using Acrobat. You're going to want to check out part two to learn all the steps to making a PDF accessible. Today, we're going to really get into the basics, and we're going to demonstrate where different accessibility areas are in the Adobe Acrobat tool. So we'll highlight those basics, and then there are those more advanced steps that you'll want to learn a little bit more about in part two. We won't have time to cover every advanced method today, and it might be too much information for all of us to retain in just the one session. So we're going to continue to add resources as we receive questions. And if we do receive questions that are pertaining to content that we may cover in part two, we may encourage you to join us for that second part webinar so you can learn a little bit more about PDF accessibility. So today we are going to cover why accessibility matters. We're going to talk a little bit more about the PDF format and how you can prepare your files for tagging before you port them over to a PDF. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about tags. What are tags and how do you use them in Adobe Acrobat? We'll also talk about how to export to a tagged PDF, and we'll talk about manual tagging versus auto tagging, because there is an auto tagging feature in Adobe Acrobat, and we'll talk about some of the limitations that exist with that. Then we'll do a little bit of a preview for part two, what you can expect to learn in the second part of this workshop series. And then we'll provide additional resources along the way. On many of our slides, you'll see an additional resources box, which will provide more information and video and text content for how to do PDF accessibility, and we hope that you'll find that information useful. So if we can go ahead and advance to the next slide, we're going to be doing a little bit of a live demonstration and using some videos, using Word, Acrobat, and potentially the pack checker tool. We're going to be doing some step-by-step guidance with visual references included on the slides. There will be a recording of this workshop available for later viewing. As we're going, we encourage questions along the way. And again, this is a brave space. We're all learning more about accessibility every day, including Jessica, Naira, and myself. We may follow up on some of those more detailed questions or if we run out of time. And again, there is the possibility that we may be answering some of these questions in part two of our workshop series. So we may encourage you to attend that as well. Additional resources are available along the way, and there are some practice documents that we'll be using to demonstrate today. And we're providing some links to information for the slide deck so that you can follow along as we're going today. So next, we're going to jump into why accessibility matters, and I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for this section. Over to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Phil. This is Jessica McQuaig. And before we move into the in-depth information on making PDFs accessible, let's lay some groundwork for why we all need to be concerned about PDF accessibility. So, digital accessibility is something that is beneficial to all of us, but it is especially crucial to individuals with disabilities and those who use assistive technologies to engage with digital content. Disabilities can impact any of us at any time. They can impact the tasks we perform, and they can impact our bodily functions. Disabilities can also vary in length. So, some are permanent or long term, and some are shorter term. In addition to disability, there are variations in human neurology that we need to be aware of. This is described as neurodiversity. Some brains struggle to operate within our current social, environmental, and technological norms. And this can include individuals with ADHD, autism, and epilepsy, among other diagnoses. Having a neurotype that struggles with current norms does not automatically equate to a disability, but these individuals may encounter barriers that rise to the level of being disabling. So let's quickly consider an example of how disability and neurodiversity intersect with digital accessibility. So, a traumatic brain injury, which is also known as a TBI, is an example of a change to brain function that can be disabling. To complete a class module, an individual with a TBI may need to use read aloud technology to prevent screen-induced headaches. They may also need to adjust the contrast and size of text to compensate for vision issues. They might also read a transcript instead of watching a lab demonstration video to prevent nausea and dizziness. These accessible modes to engage with content will also support a range of other users, disabled or not. Disability and neurodiversity are normal parts of the human experience, and accessible design can eliminate barriers for everyone. So, as we're thinking about PDF accessibility today, be thinking about all of the individuals that will benefit from the work that you're doing and the learning that you're engaged in. In addition to being beneficial for all of us, digital accessibility is also required under the law. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, has applied to public higher ed institutions like U of M since 1990 to provide equal access to our programs and services. Ensuring digital accessibility has been an ADA expectation since the mid-1990s. However, until recently, there was no agreed upon technical standard for digital accessibility, and so progress has been inconsistent. This all changed in 2024 when the Department of Justice updated Title II of the ADA, and they defined the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Level 2.1 AA as the technical standard to meet. They also provided a 2-year timeline for large organizations like the University of Michigan to come into compliance with this standard. Our deadline at U of M is April 24th, 2026, so it's coming up fast. There are a few exceptions to the new regulations, and we don't have time to cover those today, but you can learn more about these exceptions in the video linked on this slide, which is the Title II and U webinar. Resources we continue to use and reference for our programs and services, including our PDFs, do need to be made accessible proactively, and that's why we're all here today. So before we get into the technical aspects of PDFs, let's learn about what the format is and some of the pros and cons associated with the format. So PDF is the acronym for Portable Document Format, and it was designed for display stability across operating systems. However, it's important to be aware of the issues that exist with the format. First, and the reason why we're all here today, is that PDFs are difficult to make accessible, which you'll understand better after we've completed this 2-part series with you. Once PDFs have been remediated, any edits can compromise the accessibility of the file, which demands that remediation recur again. There's also a misconception that is widespread that PDFs are not editable. However, unless the PDF is protected, anyone at U of M can edit a PDF using Adobe Acrobat. We have access to the Creative Cloud suite as part of our enterprise systems at U of M, and Acrobat provides those advanced editing tools. So unless you've locked the PDF to editing, password protected it, people can still go in and make revisions. Finally, the format is not as stable as advertised. Some elements may not display consistently across interfaces. So a good example of this is fonts. They often need to be embedded in order to display properly. And underlying code for any interactive elements may not be supported by all operating systems or browsers. So support for PDF display actually it's a common degradation issue within browsers that we come across. So um, just be aware that it's not as stable as you might think it is. Given all of these limitations, we believe that a fundamental starter question that we all need to begin asking ourselves is, does this document need to be a PDF? We've linked on this slide to a PDF decision tree that can help you answer this question and help you consider alternatives. Alternatives might include a protected word processor document, and that could be from Microsoft Word or from Google Docs, a web page, or an HTML document. So today we're going to be working with a sample file that was generated from a Word document. However, it's possible that you might be working with a PDF that is a scan of a hard copy or physical document. And if you are, there's going to be an extra step that you need to be aware of. So scanned documents produce a flat image that has no detectable information for assistive technology. OCR, which is known as optical character recognition, is a technology that converts images of text into machine-readable and searchable text. And this is a tool that is available in the Acrobat environment, and I'm going to show it to you momentarily. But it's important to note that OCR often struggles to correctly interpret text when it is not clear in the image. So if you're working with an image that is faded, produced by an old typewriter, or obscured by marks or handwriting, OCR may not perform well. There is an example of a scanned document with old typewriter text and obscuring marks on this slide. This is a very old document, and I've used this multiple times to test OCR products, and typically they just perform medium well so far on this type of file. So that brings us around to how to run OCR and a potential workaround if OCR is not working for you. So I'm going to share my screen. Place. I want to make sure I share my whole screen. Okay, can I get a thumbs up? Can everyone see my screen? Amazing. All right, so on my screen right now, we have the sample document that we're going to be working with today. So to find the OCR functions, I'm going to move the Zoom toolbar out of the way. There are two ways to do this. So you can use your search bar in Acrobat to search for OCR, and it's going to bring up the tool that recognizes text, and you can just click on it from here. The other way to find the tool is to go to your All Tools menu, which is in the top toolbar ribbon in Acrobat. And when this opens, you'll see a listing of tools in either a left or right-hand side panel. This can vary depending on the type of operating system you're on. I'm on a Mac today, as well as some of the preferences that you might have set up personally for how Acrobat displays content to you. When you have the All Tools menu open, the other thing to note is that the order of the tools is also going to vary by person. So these things move around based on how often you're using them, and you can actually also like reorder them based on your preferences. So if you're not seeing the Scan and OCR function listed here, don't panic. Scroll down a little bit more, and there's going to be a View More option, and you can click this to expand to show all of the tools that are available. So in this list, there will be a Scan and OCR option. So I'm going to select this. And when this opens up, I'm going to move down under the Recognize Text area of the pane. And I'm going to use the In This File drop-down menu to open up this little dialog window. And I can run the OCR function from here. However, I have limited settings in this smaller dialog window. And so instead, I'm going to open up the Recognize Text Settings dialog, which is a larger dialog, by clicking on the cog that's in the upper right-hand corner of that dialog box. In the Recognize Text dialog, I have a few more options. So I can set the OCR to run on all pages in the document, the current page or a specific page range within the document. In this case, I'm going to run it on all pages, so I've got that button selected. I can also adjust the settings for the OCR scan. So I need to select a primary document language. Unfortunately, OCR can only run on one language at a time. This can be a limiting factor. So if you're dealing with multilingual documents that are scanned in and you need some support with this, I would recommend that you come out to the digital accessibility office hours and we can talk through workarounds for multilingual files. In this case, the document is in English, so I would select English US. And in terms of my output, there are different options, but I would like to select the option for editable text and images. This is going to pull out machine readable content. And in some cases, it will also allow you to make edits to the content that is pulled out. This function doesn't work so well anymore on Mac systems. It still works okay on Windows systems, is my understanding. So your mileage may vary if you're going in and trying to change the content that's been interpreted. But select this one just to see how it does. And then in terms of your downsampling, you're going to have four different options. My only recommendation is that you stay above 300 dpi. This is what is the best resolution. DPI stands for dots per inch. And 300 dpi is the best resolution for both screen and print purposes. So I wouldn't want to downsample below that because it might actually change the visual quality and clarity of the file. So in this case, I'm going to leave mine at 600 dpi. I'm going to hit OK. So it runs, and I'm not getting a notification that it's running because this is a very short document, so it happens really quickly. But I can check to make sure and verify that it has actually run successfully by checking out my contents pane. And Naira's going to go into more depth on the different panes that we'll be working with, but your contents pane is going to be over in your right-hand side panel. And by clicking this more options, it's going to show me the additional panes that I can open. And I have the content pane here. It looks like a document with some writing. There's an icon next to it. So I'm going to open this up. And if OCR has been successful, there will be content in this document. And so I'm going to expand this. And I can see that it has correctly interpreted the number of pages and it has detected the content on the pages very well. So I would want to be checking that there is content here and specifically checking out one of my text containers to make sure that the text has been interpreted accurately. So I can see that the time here, 11:30 a.m., has been interpreted accurately by the tool. This is great. If this was gibberish, then the OCR run would be unsuccessful. So this is how you run the OCR tool and some things to look for. Next, we're going to talk about, I'm going to stop screen sharing. We're going to talk about a workaround if OCR doesn't work well. I'm going to let Naira pull the slides back up. Perfect. Thanks, Naira. So if OCR is unsuccessful and you go into your content pane and everything is gibberish, there's another option. So you can attempt to export the content from PDF into a Word file, especially with poorly OCR'd text. It will convert and run OCR automatically while that export is happening. And the algorithm that's used for that OCR process is different from the one that's used in the active Acrobat interface. So sometimes you will have better outcomes with what is interpreted into that Word file. Then you can work inside of that Word file to clean up your text, make it accurate. This can take some work. And then from there, what we would recommend is if you've pulled all of that text out and cleaned it up in that Word file, leave it in a Word format if you need to protect it. And we'll talk, or the PDF decision tree that we linked to earlier has guidance on how to protect your Word files. But try not to convert it back into PDF because, again, you might lose all of that work that you've just done. So that is the recommended workaround. And again, if you need more support with scanning and OCR, please come to office hours and we can look at your files with you on a one-to-one basis. Okay, and now I'm going to hand things back over to Phil.
All right, so Jessica covered what to do if you're starting from a scanned document. In cases where you already have access to a digital version of the source file, like a Word document, a Google Doc, or an InDesign document, there's actually a number of accessibility best practices we recommend implementing in that source file before you convert it to a PDF. So we're going to discuss those things now. So again, if you're working with a digital file for which you have access, here's the changes that we would really recommend doing. And again, this is just because it's difficult to change or correct for these choices in Acrobat. And if it's not corrected in the original source document, then it may result in an inaccessible document. So you should do the following before converting to a PDF. You should ensure that the minimum color contrast ratio is met for foreground and background content. So this means that you're comparing your text color to your text box or document background color. You're considering decorative elements like divider lines or table outlines to background color, things like this. And on this slide, we actually have a link to a page with more information about what that minimum color contrast ratio is. And this also includes links to tools that can compare colors for you, so you don't have to just independently make that judgment yourself. You can use technology to help you with that. Secondly, you should avoid using color alone to convey important information because individuals with different types of color vision deficiency or color blindness may not be able to interpret those color changes. So we've got an example on the slide right now. We have a chart on the screen, a bar graph rather, that demonstrates student weekly activities. And there are a couple of different weekly activities organized by first year student and second year student. First year student is highlighted using a purple color, and second year student is highlighted using a blue color. So in the bar chart, you can see that the purple and the blue is really the only way of discerning difference between first year and second year student. Now, if we compare this in a different example, you can see what this might look like for someone who has a form of color blindness. So we're showing a monochrome display for this. There's very little perceptible difference between those two different colors right now. And in our next example, we want to show a color vision filter to kind of demonstrate again that there is very little perceptible difference depending on what type of color vision deficiency that someone has. We do want to give the caveat, of course, that color vision simulators are not perfect and everyone has individual unique vision, but these are used for demonstration purposes. So if you go to the next version, we actually are showing the same student weekly activities chart. And instead of just using color alone, for first year students, we are also using a diagonal stripe in the bar chart associated with first year students. And for second year students, we have a solid color. So instead of using color alone, we have a distinctive pattern, which helps to ensure that folks who may have color vision deficiency can follow along with our graph. So also, you should avoid placing images behind text. Variations in color across an image mean that it is difficult to ensure sufficient color contrast against any of that overlaid text. And then finally, an additional tip that we recommend before going over to PDF is ensuring that you've already selected a legible typeface, so your font, and that you've considered your text size when you're creating your documents. We have a link on this slide which gives recommendations around font and font size, and we recommend that you check out this resource. There's also a variety of other resources linked to on this slide which can help you make good color and font choices, including some color vision simulators, which you may find effective. If you can advance to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about color contrast checking. So we talked about how important it is to have sufficient contrast between your text color and your background colors. And there's actually a variety of color contrast checking tools out there. Contrast checker tools allow you to plug in the color of your text, that is your foreground color, and then your background color. These tools will then supply you with a contrast ratio. In general, accessibility standards require that we have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. However, we do encourage folks to exceed that minimum threshold where possible. And it's okay if you don't remember the exact threshold. These tools will remind you of that number. So on the screen, we have two screenshots related to a tool that we recommend, which is the Color Contrast Analyzer. So the first screenshot on the left demonstrates that the Color Contrast Analyzer tool is available in the University of Michigan Software Center, which means that anyone who uses an ITS managed computer has access to download this tool. It's actually an open source tool and can be downloaded directly from the TPGI website as well, and that's linked in our additional resources here. The second screenshot actually demonstrates how this tool works. Essentially, you can use an eyedropper tool to select the color of your foreground text, and then a separate dropper to select the background text. We also have listed several other browser tools that you can use for this, and we would like to just highlight that staff at U of M have actually gone to great lengths to consider accessibility in the U of M branded colors. So the University of Michigan actually lists accessible color combinations with UM branded colors. So there's the UM brand color accessibility webpage, and it also provides guidance on using colors and visuals and charts in the UM brand accessibility webpage. So if you can advance to the next slide, I'm going to briefly talk about text element formatting. Doing text element formatting in a PDF can be complex. So we do recommend doing a lot of this work in your original document before you're converting it to that PDF. So here are some steps that we recommend doing before converting to PDF. So firstly, using the paragraph styles tool to define headings with a proper hierarchy and body text to add structure to your document to support assistive technology navigation features. We also recommend using lists that can be bulleted or numbered to help organize information where you are trying to organize information in a list format. Using those lists correctly can help convey structure, and using predefined bullet types rather than creating custom bullets or using hyphens or asterisks or something else as a bullet will ensure that those lists are working effectively. You should also try to avoid extended use of nesting in lists. So try to limit that nesting in your list to 2 to 3 levels. So that might be a sub bullet point or a sub bullet point where necessary. And try to avoid hard breaks between those list items. Keeping your list concise in general is going to be helpful. Also, we recommend ensuring that your hyperlinks are associated with descriptive text and that they redirect properly. That is, that they go to the correct link destination, and that they're visually distinguishable from non-linked text. So it's very common to have an underline and a blue text color for your hyperlinks. This is oftentimes default in many document authoring programs. And sometimes that text color may change if you have already selected that link. We also recommend avoiding just long URLs where it's reading off, for example, umich.edu slash first year students slash etc. You can see how that might be challenging to navigate, especially as we get into very deep web pages on University of Michigan websites. An additional recommendation we have is avoiding header or avoiding placing important information in header and footer regions. So if your header or footer is the only area where you're providing, for example, the document title, information about the security of the document, you may want to ensure that you are providing that information elsewhere. So if you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica to talk a little bit more about alt text.
Thanks, Phil. This is Jessica. So another piece of information that it can be helpful to add in your original source document, if you have access, is alternative text for informative images. So alternative text is a text-based description of what is contained in informative images, and this is for readers who are non-visually accessing your content. So some general guidelines for alt text. Try to keep it concise. A rule of thumb is about 125 to 250 characters. You can insert more or less than this, but having less is not a problem. It's having more. It can become really, really tedious to listen to. So if you need a longer description for your alt text, it's usually best to have a link to that long description that's accompanying the image rather than placing it right into that alt text field. It's important to reflect the essential content and purpose of the image and to avoid any generic terms in your alt text description. So you don't need to say image of or picture of, because when that image is detected, the assistive technology will announce that it has detected an image and then announce the alt text description. So that's already there. It would be redundant to include it again. However, if it is a particular type of image and you want that to be clear to the reader or the end user, it can be helpful to specify things like graph and then a description or chart, table, or painting. So there may be context in which describing the type of image is helpful. Make sure that you do not repeat any information in your alt text description that is already provided in any accompanying text. So again, we don't want to be redundant. We don't want to waste users' time. So make sure that your alt text description is unique and can stand alone and does not repeat surrounding information. Make sure that you are including in your alt text description any and all text that is contained within the image, and we'll have an example of that momentarily. And then note if color is prominent or communicating information. This last guideline can be a little bit confusing because you might think, well, I'm writing this for individuals that can't see the image, so why would they need to understand the colors that are inside of the image? A lot of individuals may have inherited or lost vision over time, so they may still have visual reference points from their life. The other thing is that as a society, we commonly talk about attributing values or meanings to certain colors. And so an example that I like to use is a stoplight. And so most people learn at some point in their lives, at least if you're in North America, that if you see a green light, that means go. And if you see a red light, that means stop. And so sometimes there is color information that is important to be communicating because it's communicating a larger piece of information to the user. So on this slide, we have an example image, and I have drafted some alt text to go with it. And this is the type of image that we might see in one of our history courses at the university. So the alt text reads, illustrated government poster. Uncle Sam reaches out to the viewer for a handshake. Behind him, there is a field full of soldiers, the Statue of Liberty, military ships, and military aircraft. Text reads, shall we be more tender with our dollars than with the lives of our sons? Buy a United States government bond of the Second Liberty Loan of 1917, signed McAdoo, Secretary of the Treasury. So that's just an example of alt text. So other things to know about alt text is that we encourage you to add it in your source document where you can, but it is possible to add it inside of Acrobat. And as long as you export from that source file into Acrobat properly, and we'll cover that today, your alt text should carry over okay. If you're just working with a PDF file and you need to add it in the Acrobat interface, we're going to show you how to do that, but that's going to be in part 2 of this series. So please come back and join part 2. Okay, now I'm going to hand things over to Naira to talk about tables.
Thank you, Jessica. This is Naira Tumanyan. And now I want to talk about tables a little bit here. Another element that we should try to fix in the source document. Tables usually require additional work to be made accessible in PDFs. So that is why if you have access to the source documents, you can make this accessible before converting it to a PDF. On this slide, we are listing some table best practices before converting it to a PDF. Here are some of those. First, always create tables using built-in table tools so that assistive technology can read and navigate the data connections properly. Usually, images of tables are not accessible and they require detailed alternative text, as Jessica just covered. Also, table titles should not be placed inside the table itself. They should be separate so that screen readers don't confuse it with table data. It's recommended to keep tables simple. Complex or nested tables or tables that split across pages can be very confusing for screen readers, and they are much harder to fix in a PDF environment. Also, be careful with empty cells. Usually, empty cells can signal to assistive technology that table has ended or can trap users during navigation. So it's recommended that if data is missing, Then clearly label the cell with something like not applicable or data is missing. Also try to avoid split or merge cells whenever possible. This can break tables' structure and it can make harder for screen readers to understand relationship between data points. As users read the table, they usually form a mental map of its structure. But merged cells can interrupt that pattern and make the table harder to understand, and this overall can increase cognitive load and confusion. Finally, it's recommended to avoid using tables purely for layout. We sometimes see table formats are used just to arrange content visually, with merged cells or invisible borders. When this type of documents are saved as PDFs, then these layout tables can create accessibility issues because table structure suggests meaningful relationship between cells, basically between rows and columns. If table is only used for design, screen readers may misinterpret it as data. So if you must use a layout table, for example, if you're creating a form, then you need to make sure it's tagged correctly. Layout tables should not be marked as regular tables in a PDF environment. They should be marked as artifacts, and then there should not be table rows or data tags. There should be text tags and field tags for forms, form field, and they should be all properly tagged. We're not going to cover tagging form fields in this two-part session, but if you're interested, we can follow up with some resources. On this slide, I want to pay your attention to this table example. The top part of the screen, as you see, has an example of inaccessible table. You see merged cells here. Then the bottom part has a redesigned version of that same table where you have equal number of columns and rows. And then this redesigned version allows the screen reader to clearly identify relationships between data cells and the header. So in this example, if the screen reader lands on this cell, like reads 15, then it knows that it will announce that this number represents the caffeine content in milligrams of a hot cup of chocolate. So that's why it's important to make sure your data tables are correctly marked and follow these best practices. Next, we're gonna talk a little bit about tags and using tags because we will spend some time today to properly tag PDFs in Acrobat environment. But before we talk about tags and like how to tag a PDF, we want to see like what are these tags and why do they matter? So the first thing, before you do anything else with a PDF, and when you open the file, check and make sure whether or not it has tags. You can see this in the accessibility tags pane as you see the screenshot. Accessibility tags pane is opened, but here I see there are no tags available. Each piece of content in PDF should have a corresponding tags, which should tell the assistive technology whether something is a heading, a paragraph, maybe an image, or a text. It also allows to add non-visual information, for example, adding image description or link destinations. Tools like Microsoft Word, InDesign, PowerPoint all have built-in accessibility features, and they will help you generate tags automatically when you export the file into PDF. But then, like, you need to make sure that accessibility best practices were followed during this document creation process. If the source file is well structured, then most of the work is already done when you save it as a PDF. I say most because sometimes there are still a few things to fix in Acrobat, and we'll cover that during part 2 when we talk about tables. But even when you have a good source file, if you export the document in the wrong way, it can result in untagged PDF. That is why I'll take a few minutes to review proper way to save documents and highlight what to avoid. But first, let's go over some general tags you will be using. You can learn more about different type of tags following the resource on the slide. But in general, in text structure, you will see that everything starts with the document tag. Here's your document tag, which is a top-level container that holds other tags. Inside it, you can find container tags such as part, which marks a large section of the document, or sect, which is section tag that groups small sections within a larger part. And here on the screen, we have an example section tag. If you have PowerPoint slides and when you save them as a PDF, then each slide will appear as a section tag. These are container tags and they are not required. Technically, you can even move nested tags out of these container tags and delete these tags, but they help to group tags. Within these section tags are text tags, which mark the text components of the document. For example, P for paragraphs or body text, and H for headings. You can also see tags like L for lists or LI for individual list items. If you have hyperlinks in the document, then you will see link tag, which is a block level text tag, and you will see also OBJR tag, which is active component of the reference link, and that's a character level text tag. You can also see figure tags. Those are used for all images. And you can see also caption tags, which hold an image table or figure caption. There are also table tags, and inside the table tag, you'll find TR for table rows, housing gold tags within a specific row. You can see table data, TD, and you can see table heading, TH tags. And finally, very often you will meet this box icon. Here's this box icon, which is the content element of the associated tag that contains the actual text or maybe image or other content. We will take a closer look at how to work with these tags when Jessica demonstrates manual tagging during this session. But let's see what to do to properly save a Word document as a PDF. And for that, I'm going to use our sample document, which has been shared with you as well. So you have your Word document, which you made accessible. Now you want to save it as a PDF. So one of the correct ways of saving it as a document that will show all the tags is when you go to File, then click Save As, the dialog box will open. And then for file format, I'm going to select PDF here. And I want to make sure that Best for Electronic Distribution Accessibility is checked. And then I'll export it and save it as a PDF. Once it's done, I'm going to open that file and show you the tag. So let's open. This is the document I just saved. And when I go to the right-hand side panel, I'm going to select accessibility tags. I'll show you later like how to open all these panes. And this is accessibility tags pane. And here, once I opened it, I see my tags showing up. So that means this has been saved correctly. I have my tags. However, there is another way of saving document that will include all your tags. All Microsoft products have Acrobat tab, and if you click Acrobat on this tab and select Create PDFs, I'm going to select yes. And then I will select, I'll say option two. Then I'm going to make sure best for electronic distribution is checked, and I'll export. Same thing will happen. I will have a document that has accessibility tags available. But there is also a wrong way of saving it, or saving it in a way that will not show your tags, even if you made an accessible document. So if you go to File, Save As, and then select File Format as PDF and accidentally click Best for Printing, then when you save it as, I'm gonna say no tags here, I'll export the file, and once that's done, I'm going to open the PDF. You will see that when I click on this accessibility tags pane, I'll see no tags available. Also, if you're used to saving a document using Command P or Control P function, let me make this a little bit smaller so we can see. Okay, I'm gonna have to. Okay, so from drop down, I'm gonna select Save as PDF, and then I'll just do this, and then save it as PDF. Then I'm going to again end up with a PDF file that has no tags. So I was using I was using Mac computer to see how to save a Word document. However, you may have a different technology, and here on this slide, we're showing the screenshot of how to save a document on a Windows computer. And this slide will be shared with you so you can go back and follow along if you're using Windows computer. But now let's take a few minutes to talk about fixing PDFs in Acrobat. And this is where we will talk about the three panes. There are usually three panes you will use to fix PDFs in the Acrobat environment and to make documents accessible. When you open your file and you do not see these three panes, then I'm going to quickly demonstrate how you can do those. And I will bring my Word top. Okay, so here is your right-hand sided panel. If you right-click, you will see Accessibility Tags pane. This is another pane, Content pane. I'll mark it and it will show up. And the third pane is Order pane. So Accessibility Tags pane helps the screen reader users interpret and read content. Some screen readers use this pane, such as JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver, Read Out Loud, use Accessibility Tags pane to interpret and convey document content correctly to users. However, some other technologies, such as Text Help, Read and Write, or Dragon Naturally Speaking, use Content pane instead. Content pane shows a tree-like view of all objects in the document, and it also includes objects that are marked as artifact, which the screen reader will skip and not announce. This pane is also used in advanced accessibility work like tagging, fixing reading order, or troubleshooting specific issues in the file. We'll cover that some parts of it, like tagging today during the session and fixing reading order during part 2. And finally, there is the order pane, which shows the content, like is in a sequence in which the screen reader will read aloud content to a user. It's important to make sure that reading order makes sense so that content flows logically for users. We'll talk about using these 3 panes to fix reading order later, but for this session, we just wanted you to know about that these 3 panes you will use to fix different aspects and different elements in the PDF environment. I know this was a brief and very high-level overview of the panes, but as we work through different elements in this PDF, and use some of the tagging rules that Jessica will cover in a minute, you will see and you will become more familiar with which panes are useful in which situations. So I'm going to turn to Jessica now to talk a little bit about tagging rules.
Thanks so much, Naira. This is Jessica. So before we go into our tagging demonstration, and this is really where the rubber's going to hit the road for everyone, there are a handful of foundational rules to be aware of in regards to tags. So the first rule is that tags as a group form what we refer to as a tags tree. And at the root of that tree, there almost always needs to be a document tag. And so if you are opening your tags panel or manually remediating something and you don't have a document tag, you need to add one. The second rule is that each informative element in your document needs to be tagged correctly. Informative elements include most of your text components and many images. Proper tagging is going to enable assistive technology to tell users what role each element is playing and present it in an easy to understand way. So a good example of this is lists. When assistive technology encounters a properly tagged list, it will announce list and it will say item 1 of 5, depending on how many items are contained within that list. This helps to signal to users where the list begins and ends. The third rule is that missing tags need to be added and duplicate tags need to be removed. Again, those missing tags need to be there, so assistive tech is going to detect that element, that piece of information, and announce it to the user. And if something's duplicate, you don't want assistive tech to get confused and be announcing things multiple times, or be announcing tags when there's no content associated with the tag. The fourth rule is that decorative elements and some repeat elements, so an example of this might be a repeated publication title that's in the header area of your document, should be marked as decorative. And this is so assistive technology knows the information is not important and not to waste time relaying it to users. Marking decorative elements in Acrobat is called artifacting, and we're going to show you how to do that in part 2. Rule 5 is that tag types need to be placed in a logical hierarchy. Only some tags can be nested within or located inside of other tags. We're also going to teach you how to properly nest tags for some elements today, and we'll focus more on that in part 2. Now we're going to transition into a manual tagging demonstration video. So I'd like to ask you to please adjust your volume down just in case it comes out a little bit more loud than we're currently speaking. The other thing that I wanted to note is there's a reason that we did this as a recording, and you may experience this as you're using Acrobat. Acrobat has a tendency to behave a little bit strangely sometimes. It can crash if it gets like overloaded and it's trying to process too much at one time. So a good rule of thumb is as you're working in Acrobat, keep saving your progress so that you don't lose it. And today we'll have the recording so that this demonstration goes smoothly because it's multi-part and contains a lot of pieces. All right, Naira, take it away. A fundamental skill to creating accessible PDFs is understanding how to create tags manually. This video will demonstrate how to create tags for text, links, and image content, and how to nest tags for complex elements using a few different methods. In our sample document, We'll start by opening the Tags pane from the right side panel. As you may notice, this document currently has no tags associated with it. Let's prepare our panel by creating a tags root. Think of this like the ground your tags tree will grow in. You will add and modify tags using the Options menu that is accessed through the Tags pane. It can be opened two ways, via the three-dot button in the upper right corner, or by right-clicking on an item inside of the Tags pane itself. In this case, the only item in the Tags pane is the No Tags Available text next to the PDF icon. When the menu opens, select Create Tags Root. Now we need to add a root tag to this tags root. This is always a document tag. To add a document tag, reopen the Options menu and select New Tag. Use the drop-down menu inside the New Tag dialog box to select the document tag type. Then click OK. We have successfully added our first tag to our tree. Next, we can start tagging the document content. I'm going to show you a couple different methods for different types of content. We'll start with the document title text, which should always be tagged a heading level 1. First, create a heading level 1 tag by generating a new tag using the Options menu. So we'll open our new tag pane, select heading level 1, and hit OK to add that tag into our pane. Next, we need to move the heading level 1 tag to the proper place in the tree. This is also known as nesting. Headings are known as block level tags, which can be nested right under the root tag, so we'll place it under the document tag. You can either drag and drop the heading tag until you see it underneath the document tag. It is now nested. Or, if we undo that move, we also have the option to right-click to open up the Options menu, or use the three-dot button to open the Options menu. Scroll down to the Cut Tag option, select the document tag, and then open up the Options menu and scroll down to Paste Child. Pasting a child will make the heading tag a child tag of the document tag, which is also the equivalent of nesting the tag. And there you have it. Your heading tag now lives under your document tag. Now we need to associate the heading level 1 tag with the document title text. The first way to do this is as follows. With the H1 tag selected, highlight the document title with your cursor. Then open the Options menu and select Create Tag from Selection. The text should now be added inside the tag as containers that are represented by little box icons. If the click and drag to highlight method isn't accessible to you, you can also highlight text and image content through the Content pane. I'll demonstrate this quickly with syllabus content, which is also a heading, but this will be a heading level 2 tag item. So first we need to create a new tag. This will be a heading level 2 tag. We'll add it. It is also nested under our document tag, so we don't need to move it. With the heading level 2 tag selected, I'm going to move over into the Content pane. The Content pane is represented by the icon that looks like a document with text on it. Once I'm in the Content pane, I will need to expand all of the content by selecting the arrow to the left of the document name. It will be divided by page. I'm working on page 1, so I'm going to expand the page 1 content. Once I expand this, I should be able to see all of the detectable content that is available on page 1. I'm going to have to scroll through here until I find the heading level 2 text, which is syllabus content. As you can see, there is a lot of content in the Content pane, so this method can be a little bit tedious, but it is important to know about, especially if this is your only method of accessing the content in the document. Okay, here we found it. Syllabus and content. So I'm going to select both of these. I can select the first one and then hit Shift or Command on a Mac, or Shift or Control if you're on a PC, to highlight both items of content. You will see there is a pink box around the content on the screen, so I know they've successfully been selected. I will then navigate back to the Tags pane, right-click on the Heading Level 2 tag to open up the Options menu, and scroll down to select Create Tag from Selection. And again, we've pulled in the real text content to be associated with this Heading Level 2 tag. Next, let's talk about complex tag types and how to manually tag these. The syllabus content area functions as an interactive table of contents, so it provides a chance to show you two more skills: complex tag nesting and tagging links using the Find feature. Let's start with nesting complex tags. While I'm going through these steps, focus on the steps rather than trying to remember the nesting structure. We provide a link to a website that outlines nesting rules for common tags that you can reference any time. First, we'll create a new tag with the type Table of Contents. This is another block level tag that will go underneath the document tag and have other tags nested within it. Within a table of contents, we have items, so we need to add a table of content tag for each item in our syllabus content list. Our table of content has 5 items, so in totality, we would need 5 table of content item tags, but we're just going to do one for demo purposes today. Now that we have our table of contents item tag, we need to nest it inside of our table of contents tag. There we go. In this table of contents, the listed items are also interactive links that will jump to the in-text references they're associated with. So within each table of content items tag, we also need a reference tag. This is for in-text references. Then within the reference tag, we need to place a link tag. Let's create a new tag, and this will be a link tag type. All right, we need to make sure that these are properly nested. So the reference tag should be nested under the table of contents item tag. The link tag should be nested inside of the reference tag. Now we need to build our table of contents item tag content. This consists of 2 components: the descriptive text for the link, in this case it will be course details, as well as the interactive component of the link that redirects the user. This is known as the Link Object Property Justification Requirements, or Link OBJR tag. Let's add the descriptive text first. Select our link tag, and then you can use either method to select the text, and then create a tag from the selected text. There we have it, course details. Next, we need to add the link OBJR tag. We're going to use a new method to find this content and add it. With the link tag selected, we're going to open up our options menu, and we're going to select the find ... option. This is going to open up the Find Element dialog box. Inside of this function, we are going to use the drop-down menu to select Unmarked Links. Once Unmarked Links is selected, we're going to select Search Page so that we know we're only searching within page 1, and click Find. It's going to move through the document and highlight all of the links that are not currently tagged. It's already found as the first untagged link to the course details tag. Once that is highlighted, I want to select Tag Element. And as you can see, it has now generated a link OBJR tag. We have the complete components now for our link tag within our table of contents item. You can also use the find function to search for other content that is proving tricky to select and tag. including annotations, unmarked images, etc. So to complete our table of contents, you would continue to work through each of the items in the table of contents and tag them the same way. Next, let's talk about images. In Acrobat, images are called figures, and there are two ways to tag figures. You can either use the content pane or the find feature to select the image content and tag it. When manually tagging images, I would recommend using the content pane approach unless most of your content is already tagged. The find function for images is a general search for unmarked content, and it identifies all untagged content, which at this stage of remediation will be a lot of content to click through to get to the image. So let's find the image for the Introduction to College Writing textbook cover using the content pane. First, we need to add our figure tag. So I'm in the new tag dialog box and I'm going to scroll up, select figure, hit OK, and that will generate a figure tag in our tags pane. With the figure tag selected, we're going to open up our content pane. I'm going to scroll down a little bit so that I can visually see the image of the textbook cover. I'm going to scroll through the content looking for image icons, which look like a little Polaroid photo, and I'm going to click on these images to see if any of them are the college textbook cover image. And in fact, the first one that I've selected is that cover. So I've now got my content that I want to tag selected, which is perfect. Once it's selected, I'm going to move back into the tags pane. I'm going to, with that figure tag pre-selected, right click, open up our options menu, scroll down to create tag from selection. That is going to populate the content of the image underneath that figure tag. So we've now tagged our figure. You've now learned how to manually tag 3 different types of content: text, links, and images. You also learned 3 different methods for tagging: using cursor highlighting of content, using the content pane, and using the find function. And you saw the options for nesting tags: drag and drop or cut and paste. Just before we move into the auto tagging portion, I wanted to speak to 2 questions that came in the Q&A. So the first is a question regarding the sample file. So someone noted that in the sample file that we've shared, there are tags present, and those tags do not match what was just demonstrated in terms of adding proper tags manually. And that is correct. So in the sample file, the tags have been a result of auto tagging, which we're going to talk about momentarily. Auto tagging does not always accurately tag the content in your files. And so you would need to go through and fix those tags using the manual remediation techniques that were just demonstrated. And we're going to focus a lot on fixing up that tag structure in part 2 of this series. If you would like to practice manual remediation tagging techniques on the sample document, what you can do is go through and you can select all of the tags, like click on the top level tag and hit delete, and it will get rid of the tags, or you can use your options menu to delete all of the tags, and then you can rebuild that tags tree from scratch. But what's there presently is the result of an auto tagging function. The second thing that came in through the Q&A is that the video that we just shared was displaying a little bit blurry. So we're going to make sure that we have that corrected for the recording that goes up online so that there's good clarity for what we're demoing. So thank you for those pieces of feedback, and I hope that helps. And now I will hand things off to Phil to talk about auto tagging.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. So we want to touch a little bit more on auto tagging. So what is auto tagging? Auto tagging is a feature within the Adobe Acrobat tool that allows Adobe Acrobat to automatically apply tags to content that you've already created. Auto tagging is an effective way to begin tagging an untagged document. So if you haven't gone into your source document, saved that, done your tagging and saved that source document correctly to a PDF, you may not have any tags on your document. Auto tagging is a great way to get started. However, starting with a structured source document is sure to enhance the output before you begin auto tagging. Before you auto tag, you should consider whether there are design elements that you need to fix or revisions in that source document. We're going to talk more about that a little bit more in the next slide. Because auto tagging is imperfect, as Jessica just said, it's a good way to create some tags in your document, but technology isn't always perfect. It doesn't understand human intent. It may not understand why you designed something in a certain way or what type of content something is in your document. It's not really a one-step process. You're almost always going to need to correct something that you have auto-tagged using manual tagging. Again, if you start with an accessible source document and save that over correctly, this is going to minimize the amount of need that you have to do, the amount that you have to do in Adobe Acrobat to fix up those tags. But auto tagging is not a one-step solution. So I would next like to demonstrate how you can run auto tagging in Adobe Acrobat because we know that this is something that a lot of folks are interested in. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, it looks like the screen is showing correctly. We've got our sample document up on the screen right now, and we are going to do a brief demo on auto tagging. So this is our syllabus for English 100, Introduction to College Writing. So as we've talked about a couple of times here, on the right side of your Adobe Acrobat interface, you should be able to find the accessibility tags option. If you cannot, you may need to right click and select accessibility tags, or you may see an option to present more options. So I am going to hover over my options, and it looks like I've got my accessibility tags right here. Now, when I open this up in this document right now, we are dealing with a document that has no tags available. As we demonstrated in the manual tagging video, it can be quite tedious to go through and manually apply every single tag. So what we might do to start is run an auto tag. So how do we do this? In the accessibility tags area, you can select the three dots in the upper right-hand corner of that accessibility tags window. From there, you can select Auto Tag Document. Once you do this, Adobe Acrobat is going to take a little bit of time to go through and generate tags for your document. Again, this is Adobe Acrobat's best guess at your tags using information that is in the data of this document. So you'll see that it went ahead and generated some tags for us. We've got heading 1, we've got a heading 2, we've got some paragraph text. You'll note that it is not perfect in how it has tagged things. So we have an aside, but there are things that we would need to fix up after auto tagging a document. So what are some of the limitations of auto tagging? I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to turn it back to the slides to talk a little bit more about limitations that you may run into.
Okay, thank you, Phil, for this demonstration. I want to briefly talk about a few limitations. We saw that auto tagging can be a helpful starting point, but it's not perfect. It still requires careful review and manual correction. Let's briefly talk about heading and footer content here. When you run auto tagging, header and footer content may not be reliably tagged. This is what I mean. It can often be tagged on every single page as a regular body text, and it can be read aloud multiple times by screen readers, which can create a frustrating user experience. Imagine you're listening to a sentence that continues onto the next page. I'm sorry. And suddenly, the screen reader reads the page number or header information right in the middle of the sentence. This breaks the flow. This means that repeated page numbers, document titles, if they are in the header section, or any other recurring elements in the header and footer section need to be reviewed carefully. And if they contain meaningful, informative information, you can mark tag them once and artifact the rest if they are going to repeat throughout the document. So that means you need to carefully check after auto tagging to remove this repeated information and create more smooth user experience. For heading, auto tagging often can get headings wrong. It may label a heading as a regular paragraph instead of proper heading level, or sometimes just large text can automatically be tagged as heading level 1 or heading level 2 just because the text was large. That's why it's important to review all heading levels and make sure they are correct and consistent throughout the document. For accessibility, you're recommended to use heading levels 1 to 6 with clear structure, and they should follow a logical order without skipping levels. This means that heading level 5 should not come directly after heading level 3. It should be heading level 3, heading level 4, heading level 5. And for images, auto tagging often cannot distinguish between informative images and decorative images. Decorative images should be marked as artifacts, while informative images must include meaningful alternative text. Also, auto tagging will not generate alternative text for you. You must manually add clear, descriptive alternative text for any images that convey important information. Next, I'll turn to Phil to continue on limitations of auto tagging.
Thanks, Naira. So there's a couple more aspects of accessibility that auto tagging really struggles with. Again, automated tools and AI solutions are improving, but we're still seeing issues in these areas as well. So we do see issues with tables. In our recent testing, we found that auto tagging that is being applied to table structures such as that have table header rows or columns are often not tagged correctly. We also see auto tagging miss cells or sometimes combining cells of data. Generally, auto tagging may make assumptions about how a table is structured or how it works, and this results in a poorly tagged table that is not going to be accessible. For lists, we do see that auto tagging may sometimes tag some lists as plain paragraph text. We find this variability can occur more often based on the different types of bullet points that you use or for numbered list, but this issue does occur intermittently. You may also encounter this if you have different spacing between your list, your bullet point, for example, and the actual text following the bullet point. Auto tagging also gets pretty confused by those complex list structures that we talked about earlier. So if you have multiply nested lists, auto tagging generally struggles with that. Also, auto tagging struggles with reading order. Auto tagging really has trouble understanding human intent, where reading order strays from top down, left right, or makes use of columns or variable with structural components. We find that Adobe's auto tagging really struggles. This is particularly pronounced in more of designed documents. We had a couple of folks talking about infographics that they create and publish and distribute as PDFs, and we've found that sometimes auto tagging can struggle with understanding the reading order of those items. Additionally, Adobe is not going to populate important metadata and properties for you, which means that there's still going to be a little bit of extra work to do after you're running your auto tagging. And we hope that that is a takeaway that you'll have from this. After you auto tag, you'll want to manually review, and you'll probably need to do some manual tagging to fix up that document. Next, we'd like to just briefly touch on our key takeaways and talk about what you can expect in part 2.
Thanks, Phil. This is Jessica. So, key takeaways from part 1. The first thing is avoid converting files to PDF and using PDFs wherever possible. We understand sometimes you might be stuck with the format, you might have to use the format. That's what these sessions are for. But in cases where you do not have to use PDF, try to use alternative formats. They're easier to make accessible and keep accessible over time. The tools to assist with PDF remediation have limitations. So we've repeated this throughout today's session. OCR or optical character recognition has limitations. Auto tagging has limitations. And the accessibility checker, which we're going to review in part 2, also has limitations. It always, always, always requires manual effort to make PDFs accessible. So it is important that we understand the required structure, which we spent time looking at today, and how to make manual fixes. So let's talk about part two, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So in part two, we are going to be looking at tagging specific elements in Acrobat, so tables, lists, links, etc. We'll talk about the tag types for those elements, the proper hierarchy, and the tag properties. We're also going to look at setting up proper reading order, adding document metadata, and using advanced accessibility checkers and performing repairs based on the results from those checkers. So we do have some resources in the slide deck, but before we move into the resource review, I just wanted to open up the floor and see if there are any additional questions coming in through the Q&A that we can respond to. So if you have a question, I think you can submit it in Q&A and we can respond in real time. I did flag some questions too. So we got a question about alternative text, a couple questions. So the first was in regard to alt text being somewhat interpretive or subjective. So depending on who's writing the alt text may differ. That is very true. We are all just doing our best when we're crafting alt text. And so I did mention to the person that asked the question that it's important to understand the context and also like context that the image is being shared in, what the image is trying to communicate, and also the content within the image. The person that knows that best is the original author of the document. And so if you are the original author, that's great. Hopefully you know what you're trying to do with that image and what the image is depicting. If you are not the original author and you're remediating someone else's work, you may have to get in touch with people that understand what's contained within an image. So I use the example of remediating files with archaeological artifacts, images of archaeological artifacts. And I had to actually get in touch with people at U of M that work on that subject matter to ask them, what are these things? Because I didn't know, and I didn't want to mislead people. So we do fortunately have access to a wide number of subject matter experts at the university. So if you're really struggling to get something right, getting in touch with some of the departments at U of M might be helpful to understand what the content is, or just doing your best with the tools that you have available at your disposal. The second question around alt text was in cases where you currently have a document that has repetitive alt text, so it's repeating information that's already contained in the body text of that document. How can you update that to make it more accessible and more usable by assistive tech users? And what we recommend is referencing that a more fulsome description is available in the accompanying body text, and you can do that in the alt text description field. So you might just want to quickly name what the image is or very briefly describe what's in the image and say, for a longer description, reference body text. And that's sufficient for users. Okay. I'm gonna pause there. Phil and Naira, were there any questions that you all saw coming in that might be helpful to address for the whole group?
This is Phil. There was a question about, well, actually, I'm going to pause because another question just came in. Should alt text be written a certain way? For example, I saw a YouTube that showed that alt text written with quotations surrounding it. It's more of an art than a science when you're writing alt text. One practical bit of guidance we might give you is to consider how you might describe an image or a chart or a graph over the phone to someone. That's oftentimes a good starting point. And then also to consider that surrounding text, which may also help provide a more clear description. So I answered that one.
Can I add something, Phil,
Please,
regarding
Naira.
alt text? Yes, you should keep in mind that whatever you add, it will be announced by a screen reader. So if you have quotation marks, it's gonna announce. Think about whether or not you also want that to be announced, whether it makes sense. If it's like a word you want to emphasize in quotation marks, it maybe use that. But otherwise, think about also user experience as you crafting your alt text because every single character will be announced by a screen reader.
Thanks, Naira. There was one other question that came in, and this was about academic articles and publications that are in PDF format and that are being shared in courses. We know this is a huge area of concern at the university, and so I do want to address this. So our recommendation for academic articles and publications and the recommendation of the U of M library is that if those academic contents are available through the library, instead of downloading the PDF, re-uploading it to your course content and having it available to students that way, as an alternative, provide a persistent catalog link that redirects to the publisher platform or the aggregator platform where that content is hosted. What this does is two things. So often on those publisher platforms, there are multiple formats available of an article or publication. This allows students to select the format that's going to work best for their needs. The other thing is that our publishers are being strongly encouraged by both the U of M library and other higher ed institutions to be making their content more accessible. And so they are going in and updating files, and obviously they have a lot of them, so it's taking time. But as they replace the files that are available with more accessible versions, those will go up at that persistent link location. And what that means is that students are getting access to the most current and most accessible version of that file. We do not feel that it is practical to proactively go and pull publisher content and remediate all of it. And so that is the method that we are recommending for giving students access to the most accessible versions and options as well. Phil, I don't know if you would add anything else to that.
This is Phil. I don't think I would add anything further, other than the fact that publishers have been getting a lot of this feedback due to the regulations change, and it's really pushing them to do better and provide us with better materials. So that's been great. And they're certainly incentivized to provide those more accessible materials in their web versions with those persistent links.
And we did have a comment come in the Q&A from a library employee, so thank you for being here and adding this, regarding library materials that do not currently have a digital analog version. So it's a physical copy where there's a scan that's done. And so if you are using a scanned version from a physical library material, that is where tools like OCR would come in handy. You may want to consult with the librarians at the library system to ask for a high quality scan of the physical content to make sure that your OCR output is as good as possible. Okay, we're at 129. So quickly, I'd like to review the additional resources that we have for all of you, and we will be sharing all of the questions and answers from today's session in the follow-up email that you receive after this session. So keep a watch out for that. Okay, so at the University of Michigan, we have the Digital Accessibility Strategic Initiative. This is a joint collaboration between the Disability Equity Office and Information and Technology Services. And there are a number of resources that you can access through this initiative, including enterprise scanning and remediation tools, assistive technology tools and support, and technical support for the different products and services that are offered at U of M. So there are links to that on the next slide. Perfect. And then in addition to this, we have the accessibility.umich.edu website that contains a ton of information on the digital accessibility standards and best practices for meeting those. There are a number of linked resources that you can access on the slide that will take you directly to the corresponding web pages. And then the Disability Equity Office also has resources available to you. We have upcoming trainings that you can access through our Happening at Michigan page, and we've linked to that, and there's a QR code to access that. So please join us for more trainings in the future. You can reach out to us directly if you need to request workplace accommodations or hiring process accommodations. If you'd like to request American Sign Language or live captioning services, if you'd like to request a consultation or review of something, so please get in touch with us if you need our services. You can also request training and workshops, either existing workshops or we, in some cases, can tailor things slightly to the needs of your unit. And you can report barriers to access. So if you run into a digital accessibility barrier or a physical accessibility barrier, or you know someone that does, please report it to us. This allows us to look into it and resolve that barrier for individuals. And then finally, there's an option at U of M to voluntarily self-identify as having a disability through Wolverine Access. There's a link to do that. When you report your disability status, this becomes part of statistical data at the university. It is not reported to anyone at the university that you are identifying as having a disability, but what does do is tell the university the percentage of individuals that are here that have a disability, and it helps us advocate more effectively for resources. And then finally, a list of more learning opportunities from the DEO. And with that, we thank you all for being here and joining us. As I mentioned, please stay tuned for that follow-up email with all of the resources from today's session.